With 9.2.0 and the anti-slug and tunnel update looming on the horizon, survivors are universally celebrating, while behavior is leaning back in an aura of smug, soon-to-be success and self-satisfaction at what is no doubt their own genius. Well, that is until someone just asks the question. Well, what happens when killers refuse to play by these rules?
If I refuse,
why worry about something that isn't going to happen?
why worry about something that isn't going to happen? Oh, that's perfect. They should put that on our money.
Hi, my name is Mad Moon, and today I'm going to be examining player psychology, game theory, and the Cobra Effect, and how I believe this is going to shape a retaliatory dark meta in the future. Let's begin. So as I'm sure a lot of you probably know, 9.2.0, the playtester beta, which should be live either soon or shortly after this video, is introducing anti-tunneling and anti-slugging measures, which many killers, myself included, have pointed out is almost certainly going to be a make-or-break situation, and based on everything we're seeing right now, I think we're leaning towards this is probably going to quote-unquote kill the game. If you haven't seen my initial take on it, I'd recommend watching that first as a primer for this video. It's going to help you kind of roll with the punches and the beats that we're going to be going through. But as those of you who have already watched, you will know that we covered a little bit of Pigouvian taxes as a direct analog to the situation unfolding in real time. Now, I'm not going to go over the huge recap of that. Just know that whatever you want less of, you're just going to tax, and anything you'd like more of, you want to subsidize. With that, the problem is that Behaviors 9.2.0 is that their patch overtaxes and under-subsidized, which is otherwise known as a draconian measure, which is going to breed resentment and rebellion from the killer player base. Moreover, it's going to be due to the fact that these are hard and fast rules that cripple the killer for not following them, and they go beyond mere disincentivizing taxes and are going to push the realm of regulation/law. For a historical example, the one I posited last time was prohibition in American history, which is a great example of people being forced to obey, and they will obey, but it didn't change the fact that it bred huge resentment, rebellion, and eventually a whole criminal underground that wound up circumventing the rules and either just dodged the consequences of them, or they just ate them, took it on the chin, rather than live under these draconian measures that told them what they could and couldn't do. Regardless, I couldn't quite see how something like that would work with killers post this update, given the digital panopticon that would be set up by behavior, essentially by this. I could only really see two outcomes from it in terms of how that rebellion was going to translate, and that would be either it's going to push people into higher tiers of killers, which, as you probably know, only A or S tiers are really going to be viable with these new rules, at least in that they're going to be able to play in the way that behavior wants you to. And S tier, as we all know, is just going to be generally unaffected by any of this. And anyone who's below that, who just refuses to trade out their favorite quote-unquote suboptimal killers for meta-defying killers, is probably just going to silently quit. Now, whether that's completely uninstall the game, or just become Survivor mains, or just play a little bit less and only Survivor, I mean, it's just less killer all around. At the same time, though, I could feel that there was something that I was missing. Something that would more closely resemble that kind of prohibition-like example that I pointed out. Even if I couldn't quite get the contents of the puzzle piece, I knew the shape of it. But regardless, I spent my time after creating this video thinking about perks that were going to increase in value from this. As we know, there are perks that are going to be changed, but I was thinking more of just perks that they aren't going to adjust that are going to become very valuable, a new premium that's going to rise with their so-called stocks, if you will. Resilience was a really obvious one for Survivor, as pretty much any healing perks are, given the fact that we're just making several perks for them base kit and at a whole new condition. But Killer, there was really only one type of perk that I could see having immediate value. But even so, I didn't really connect the dots between the two until someone in my comments had mentioned the Cobra Effect. And I'd honestly considered talking about the Cobra Effect in the last video, but I kind of wanted to keep that subject more concise and closing around behavior's failure to incentivize correctly and their Pigovian tax. And it didn't quite fit, at least not the way I wanted to. And right now you might be wondering, well, what is the Cobra Effect? Well, the Cobra Effect, the term comes from colonial India. The British authorities were worried about the number of venomous cobras in Delhi, so they offered a bounty for every dead cobra that was brought to them. And at first it worked. People are bringing in piles of snakes, but then clever locals started to just breed cobras just to kill them from the reward, and it became a business. The government realized this, they canceled the program, and the breeders just released their now worthless cobras into the wild population, and it wound up, all in all, having more cobras than when they started. The cobra population was larger when it ended than when it began. Now, the Cobra Effect is a very powerful illustration that good intentions alone do not good policy make, and that sometimes the very rules and regulations we inject into a system to fix a problem wind up making things even worse than when they started. Anyhow, now that you're all caught up and we've laid the appropriate groundwork for this prediction, the types of perks I foresee being a rebellious dark meta in the same way as Prohibition created an entire underground economy of booze and nationwide resistance and resentment is simply this. If the changes are as bad as we all suspect they're going to be, it's going to signal a side meta for lower tier killers. We're talking like B tier and under, the likes of which has really never been seen in DBD history, and that is going to be an endgame meta. Think about it. With penalties starting at deaths before 6 hit states and threats like block gens, increased generator speed, the reality is for killers below that A tier threshold, most if not all are not going to make the cut. By mass, almost everyone below A tier that is going to try and follow these rules is going to be finished in terms of their high MMR viabilities. They're just not going to be able to make it, and generally speaking, even at medium tiers, there's just going to come those situations where it's just not going to be possible. It's just not going to work out, whether that's 2-man / 3-mans versus the obvious Swifts, the highest MMR, or you just happen to come across some very, very good survivors who are getting very lucky. It's just not going to work. In fact, if you follow these rules, we all know the chance of survivors repairing all generators is just going to rise exponentially. You're just role-playing to give them extra chances just because. So we're at that point where finishing the generators is pretty much all but guaranteed no matter what you do. But here's the thing that everyone's overlooking. If the rules bring you to the endgame no matter what, and breaking the rules, like tunneling and slugging, don't affect the endgame, there's actually no incentive to not plan to make your stand in the endgame. And if it's the endgame where you want to make your stand, then getting there following the rules in a bad situation is far less preferable than just breaking the rules to get to the endgame. Think about it, would you rather face the endgame with 5 hooks spread evenly through all survivors, or would you rather have one survivor already dead, another on death hook, and a Rancor / Game of Foot combo in your pocket, ready to go? If the endgame is inevitable, there's no reason not to plan for the endgame. If we're going into the endgame every game, wouldn't you rather it be because you have already killed a survivor and are now working on a 3v1, possibly even a 2v1 in the endgame, rather than spread hooks in a losing strategicless game with no path to victory but gambling and chance? When killers who cannot spread pressure due to the mechanical nature of their power and neglect from behavior's incompetence see this, the view of the game itself is going to undergo a magnetic polar inversal. Rather than in-game being the gravy for your hard-fought, front-loaded game, the front half of the game is going to be nothing but setup and icing for when the real fight begins, which is going to be the last 2 minutes of the game. Phase 2, 9.2.0 PTB, and the anti-slugging / tunneling measures aren't going to make these strategies disappear. In fact, when killers who refuse to trade out their Sadakos, Pigs, Pyramid Heads, Ghost Faces, Trappers, Legions, when they realize this, I predict there's going to be far more reports of tunneling in particular all around, followed with these in-game builds, because tunneling is just immaterial. If we're going to the in-game no matter what, you might as well just tunnel somebody out. I'd rather face the endgame with one less survivor in it than all 4. What perhaps gives me equal measure confidence on that prediction is that the survivor players who are pushing for these changes, well, we can all kind of agree that it's kind of like a self-report. These are generally bad players, and they're likely to encounter the lower roster killers to begin with, who are probably implementing these strategies out of necessity. When you're playing somebody who's like C- or D below, I mean, you have to rely on these adaptive strategies to secure a victory. While these perks will be dubious against the real winners of this update, which is going to be Survive with Friends, for everybody else, the endgame perks are about to see a surge in value. If for some reason you weren't aware of this strategy when Springtrap released, there have been notes that killers like Hag or Singularity could combo things like Remember Me and Haywire, also slapping on something like Terminus, and maybe Batteries Included was a fairly nice choice with that, to create a situation where the endgame could never end, essentially. The exit gates themselves could never be fully powered and people could never truly escape. Another one that I am particularly fond of is Game Afoot, Rancor, No Way Out, and Remember Me. And I'm sure you can imagine how entering into the endgame with one man already dead, maybe even 2, would make that a very fearsome way to conclude a game. Things like this, in terms of their strategy, are going to become more commonplace. For killers that don't give up, one has to imagine, beyond the obvious motivations for some, such as like a financial return from streamers, or just sunk cost fallacy for people who have dumped an incredible amount of hours into this game. For those others who don't quite fit those boxes, there has to be an element of spite that exists in these killers to remain throughout an update like this. Those that are spiteful and are not going to simply roll over and let behavior and these bad survivor mains have their way with them, this seems like a retaliatory measure that we're going to see more of. Killers put up with an unbelievable amount of toxicity already. Generally speaking, they're the more mature role. They have to have a lot more accountability considering they're a team of 1 and there's nobody else to blame but you. And generally speaking, they're a very patient lot. But there's only so much anyone can take. This is Mad Moon, and if you want to be ahead of the curve when this patch hits, subscribe now, because the dark in-game meta is coming, and we covered it here first.